Mistress Munchkin and the Plutonium Dragon, Part 1. Mistress Munchkin sat on her lonely cliff top and eyed the nuclear reactor with a somewhat jaundiced eye. It was gearing up for one of those big events, she could tell, and she wondered what would come of her efforts to control the harm this time. Some lottery to win, she humphed to herself. I might have won a car, or money, or a pony. Instead, I get 3 years on a cliff top with a giant lump of glowing concrete. She didn't actually mind all that much, but having been on her own too long, Mistress Elfrida Munchkin had got into the habit of grumping to herself to pass the time. Actually, to be put into the cauldron to be in the draw for guardian of the reactor was a great honour. Not every druid got to take on such a responsible role. You had to be at the very top of your druidic game to even be considered. Elfrida eyed her threatening companion some more. Don't even think about it, she growled. You could affect the reality of anything if your power was strong enough, but a reactor was a very powerful dark being, and yet childishly simple too, with a small child's tendency to tantrums, and it required a great deal of the aging druid's energy to tone down its mischief. Not that age made any difference to your power if you were a druid. Elfrida had been studying and building her skills for 50 years, girl and woman, and if anyone could handle the reactor, lumpy bum as she'd come to call it, it was she. The cold's crept into my fingers, she told it now, and all I want to do is go into my cottage there and make tea and grump by the fire. Lumpy Bum radiated a little slap at her in a childish way, just to keep in practice, then subsided back into its grassy hill. Mistress Munchkin could tell that the latest fit of temper had been averted for now, more because the being that was the reactor had truly come to like her company than because she had used any controlling power. Good boy, she told it. I'm going in for my tea now, but if you feel angry, be sure to let me know. She stood up from her cross-legged perch there on the cliff top. Power she had in plenty, but some things you just got too old for, and sitting on the cold ground, even on your ample bum, was still going to give you a pain. Druids didn't like to take away the limitations of the flesh. It was part of the gift that was physical life. She could tweak, though, and tweak she did, so that by the time she had reached the weathered and bleached wooden door of her cottage, she was walking straight and tall once more. Elfrida Munchkin, a name she had taken for herself long ago at her initiation, the first name meaning good counsel to remind herself to be wise, and the second being silly to remind herself not to take everything too seriously, was a lady of some 55 years. Her hair was strong, thick, wavy, darkly badger grey, and was generally to be found in one long braid down her back if it wasn't blowing wildly about her face in all of its glory. Her body was tall and powerful, with raw bony hands and hips that could carry a babe or a tool belt with equal panache. Her face was of matching strength, with a long nose that tilted down in a way that sometimes reminded people of a gnu, strong cheeks and jaw, and large dark eyes that were hooded over with heavy brows. Not a beauty, no, unless you saw the beauty in wildness and in strength, in bright intelligence tempered with heart and humour. Elfrida had all of those things in spades, and indeed many a man had found her beautiful and still did, though she was choosy in who she accepted, these days at least. Time was when she wouldn't have been, and she liked to look back on those lively times with pleasure, but she didn't yearn for them to return. She pushed open the rickety door of her little cottage on the cliff. Small, bockety and cosy, it had something she had not come across in a building before, a twin spirit. Maelgwyn and Gaelgwyn it was called, and somehow the two spirits of elderly siblings managed to inhabit it together in somewhat crabbit harmony. I'm home, she told them now, throwing her grey wool cloak over the back of the couch and going to put wood on the fire. Tea, please, Fusser dear, she told the old kettle that hung over the fire, and it began to steam at once. By the time she had prepared her favourite teapot, known as Stuart, the kettle was whistling away in a cheery manner that belied its nickname. Everything in this cottage had its own spirit, just as everything in the world did, but objects that had been around druids for long definitely woke up and developed strong personalities, especially the things that druids used all day long. You didn't have to name them to work with them, but Elfrida wouldn't have a pet animal here, living so close to the risk of poison radiated by Lumpy Bum, so she'd taken to making pets of her household objects. She poured boiling water into Stuart, then cradled his warm belly in her cold hands. It's chilly out there today, she grumped to the room in general. You're lucky to get to stay in here by the fire, and Lumpy Bum is restless this evening. I bet he gets me up in the middle of the night." "Ah, Mistress Munchkin," Galeguin said. He was sitting in an armchair by the fire. She couldn't see him very well, but she could feel him there, sitting where he so often was. "Don't be grumbling now," he told her fondly in her head. "You know you're needed here and that your order values your work highly. Soon enough your time here will be done and we'll be settling into the ways of a new guardian. Where will you go then, Druid?" Elfrida poured tea into her favourite cup, also her biggest and known as bowly. Sometimes creativity escaped her when it came to naming things. She leaned back into the crocheted blankets that bored guardians before her had made on the long winter nights and took her first sip of tea. "Somewhere warm," she said dreamily. "Somewhere with lots of people. Embodied people," she quantified apologetically to Galeguin. "I think I'm getting a little strange living up here all on my own." "Yeah, you always were strange," said the spirit, chuckling in his crusty old way, and she had to agree. She had. "Your kind of strange, however, is a very good thing," he went on kindly. She wasn't really sure what he or his sister were, ghosts or the embodied accumulated spirit of this old place or something else entirely, but either way they probably didn't need to retain their elderly forms and voices. They must want to be old people for some reason. Elfrida didn't mind. It was like having your grandparents around to give you wisdom, and maybe that was the point. Would she take advice from them if they were a pair of teenagers? Probably not, though she had taken advice from much weirder beings in her time than a teen spirit. She couldn't feel Maelgwyn right now. Probably the old spirit had gone off to the other cottage in the forest that she was somehow also the spirit of. Elfrida had no idea how that worked, but she journeyed with Maelgwyn to that place and it had a similar feel to this, excluding the difference of setting. Why didn't Galeguin go there too? Who knew? Elfrida worked in mysteries and she didn't need to always know why things were as they were, only that they were. She sipped her tea peacefully, saying no more. That was the nice thing about spirits and awakened things with personality. They mostly didn't feel any need to keep chattering on about nothing, though she had once owned a handbag that had never shut up and almost driven her mad before she'd rehomed it to a person who couldn't hear it. She'd felt kind of bad about that until she realised that it had never actually listened to her and probably wouldn't even notice that its new owner wasn't replying. Through the tiny windows that faced the sea, she watched the light fade from the sky. She contentedly wiggled her toes at the fire, cradling Bowley in her hands, while Fussy steamed gently, ready in case she wanted more tea. This isn't such a bad life, she told herself. Maybe I don't really need a warm climate or lots of people. Not yet. Anyway, her opinion on that changed pretty quickly at 3 a.m. when Lumpy Bum blew his top. And that's the end of part 1.